I thought it was another through hiker. I saw the white LED beam bouncing through the fog on the upper switchback, and I yelled out to see if they had space in the shelter. But it didn't yell back. The light just stopped swinging. It dropped flat into the dirt, and then I heard the brush breaking as it started sliding straight down the mountain toward me. There is a recording. That is how this story begins, as so many of the old ones do. Not with a campfire, not with a grandmother's warning whispered across a kitchen table smelling of wood smoke and dried apple, but with a small black digital recorder, the kind a person clips to the shoulder strap of their pack when they hike alone and want some evidence of their passing through this world. The kind a person clicks on with trembling fingers when they need to say something out loud into the dark, and there is no living soul close enough to hear them. The southern Appalachians have a particular quality at night. I want you to understand this before we go any further. If you have never stood on a high ridgeline in western North Carolina, above 5,500, maybe 6,200 feet, in the deep middle of October, in the hours past midnight, then there are things that language will only approximate. The cold is not simply cold. It is a presence. It moves inside your clothing. It finds the gap at your collar and presses against the side of your throat like a damp, deliberate hand. The fog at that elevation is not the soft, romantic mist you might imagine. It is a wall. It is a ceiling. It arrives without warning, and it turns the world into a gray corridor that shrinks your entire existence down to the small, pale circle of light your headlamp throws against the ground directly in front of your boots. And in that gray corridor, on a trail that may not see another human being for 3 or 4 days in either direction, the most comforting, most deeply reassuring thing a lone hiker can possibly see is the distant, bobbing white light of another headlamp moving through the trees. This is the vulnerability the old mountain people understood. They knew what a person's relief could make them do. I called the thing by different names depending on the county. Some said the false hiker. Some older families, the ones whose grandparents had homesteaded the hollow bottoms before the Park Service came through, used a phrase that translates loosely as the one that carries a borrowed light. The name recorded in this archive is the one that seems to have appeared most consistently in the accounts collected from shelter logs and search and rescue debriefs along a 70-mile stretch of the southern high route. They called it the Headlamp-Catcher. Let us follow the trail. Let us follow it slowly. The hiker's name does not matter to the telling of this. What matters is that she had been walking for 19 days. 19 days along a high, unmaintained route that parallels and diverges from the better-known paths, a route that demands real navigation, paper maps, a compass, and the kind of deep, accumulated confidence that only comes from having made bad decisions in the back country before and survived them. She was experienced. She was not reckless. These two facts are important to establish, because what happened to her was not the result of carelessness. The mountain was simply patient in a way that human experience cannot fully account for. By the time the events on the recording took place, she had been moving for 11 hours. The pack on her back weighed 41 pounds with water. She would tell this to the person who found her 3 days later, still sitting in the shelter, unwilling to leave it, her voice very flat and careful and precise. 41 pounds. The shoulder straps had compressed a kind of permanent ache into the trapezius muscles on both sides of her neck. Her trekking poles had developed a slight rattle at the left carbide tip, where the collar had loosened over hundreds of miles of rocky trail. And the sound, tick, tick, tick against the stone, had become so embedded in her rhythm that she only noticed it when it stopped. She was pushing late. A storm system was moving in from the southwest, the kind that the weather radio had called significant, and she needed to reach the 3-sided wooden shelter at the gap before it arrived. The shelter was a simple thing: rough-hewn boards, a sleeping platform, a metal bear box bolted to a tree nearby. But it was the only structure within 9 miles in any direction, and in a significant mountain storm, those 9 miles become something closer to a death sentence than a hike. The rhododendron on that section of ridge is among the densest in the eastern United States. This is not an exaggeration offered for effect. The rhododendron thickets along that high route form what botanists call hells, and the trail name is not borrowed from that word by accident. In daylight, they are dark tunnels of twisted, waxy-leafed branches that interlace overhead and block the sky completely. At night, at 2 in the morning, with fog, they are something close to total sensory deprivation, punctuated only by the pale disk of your headlamp on the path ahead and the sound of your own breathing and the occasional low, organic groan of a tree responding to wind pressure somewhere above the canopy. The smell inside those thickets is deep and particular. Wet bark, old leaf decomposition, something faintly sulphurous from the soil. A smell that registers somewhere below conscious thought as ancient and indifferent and enormous. She was moving through a break between 2 thicket sections, a rocky, open stretch of trail that crossed a high shoulder of the ridge, when she looked across the hollow. The hollow to the east dropped away several hundred feet before rising again into a parallel ridgeline. In daylight, it would have been a view. At night, it was simply darkness. Deep, matte, total darkness, broken only by the restless movement of fog through the treetops far below. She stopped to drink water and to let her heart rate settle. And she stood there at the edge of that rocky shoulder looking east into the void. And that was when she saw it. A white LED light moving through the trees on the far ridge. She said later, in that flat, careful voice, that the relief was physical, that it moved through her chest like warmth, like the specific warmth of being found. The trail over there was not a maintained path. It was a use trail, a hunter's trace, something old and intermittent. And her first thought was simply that another experienced person was out here navigating the same storm window she was, pushing hard to reach cover. The thought of another person, any person, made the rhododendron feel less absolute, made the cold feel less deliberate, made the 41 pounds feel briefly manageable. She watched the light for a long time before she began walking again. It moved with the particular, irregular rhythm of a hiker, speeding slightly on easier ground, slowing and bobbing more dramatically as the terrain grew technical, disappearing momentarily behind dense tree trunks before reappearing. A hiker's light, a tired hiker's light, with that specific quality of movement that comes from a body that has been upright and moving for too many hours, and is running now on mechanical habit rather than genuine energy. She walked. The light on the far ridge walked with her. For an hour and 10 minutes. She noted the time. She was precise. The light kept pace. There was something enormously reassuring about this. The parallel companionship of another warm body moving through the same dark corridor at the same exhausted pace. She found herself adjusting her speed experimentally at one point, walking slightly faster for 100 yards, and the far light kept pace. She slowed, and it slowed. She told herself this was coincidence, because of course it was coincidence. The trail on that ridge had its own dictates of terrain. Another hiker would follow those dictates at their own rhythm. Parallel movement meant nothing. She came to the rocky trail junction at the gap, a wide, flat clearing where two trails crossed, marked by a weathered wooden post with arrows pointing in 4 directions, and she stopped to pull out her map and confirm she was on the correct bearing for the shelter. She crouched with her headlamp angled down at the paper, tracing the contour lines with one cold finger. And after a moment she looked back across the hollow. The far light had stopped. It was not bobbing. This was the thing she noticed first. And the noticing arrived not as alarm, but as a gentle, peripheral unease. The same quiet register you might give to a door that you were certain you had closed, and now is standing slightly open. The light was not bobbing. It hung in the trees on the far ridge, at what she estimated was roughly her own elevation, absolutely level. And it swayed, very slowly, with a long, pendulous rhythm, left, and then right, and then left again. Not the bob and jerk of a human body breathing and shifting weight, not the irregular, organic motion of a tired person standing still and looking around. A slow, metronomic sweep, like something swinging from a fixed point, like something that did not have a heartbeat, or a respiratory rate, or the 10,000 small, unconscious muscular corrections that keep an upright body upright. She stayed very still for a long time. She watched the light sweep left, and then right, and then left. The fog between the ridges moved in long, slow currents, and the light disappeared into it sometimes for seconds at a time, and then reappeared, still swinging at the same unhurried pace. She made the mistake that the recording captures. She made it because she was tired, and because 19 days alone at elevation does something particular to a person's need for company, and because the rational explanation, another hiker, resting, stretching, perhaps checking their own map, was so close and so available and so warm. She pressed the button on her headlamp twice, cycling it through its modes, flashing it twice at the far ridge, the universal signal, the hiker's greeting across a dark valley. She cupped her hands around her mouth and she called out across the hollow. The sound of her voice disappeared immediately into the fog. The mountains absorbed it without echo. And across the hollow, the far light, the swinging, level, pendulous light dropped, not dimmed, not clicked off in the deliberate way a person extinguishes a headlamp when they are done with it. It dropped, as though whatever was holding it at that height had simply released it, and it fell to the forest floor and went out. And then the hollow was silent in a way that it had not been silent before, because there had been sound. Beneath the wind, beneath her own breathing, the 10,000 small sounds of a living mountain at night. Insects and water and the movement of small creatures. And now those sounds were also gone. The silence was sudden and total, and it had the quality of held breath. She stood at the junction for several seconds, and then she heard it. Not footsteps. The thing did not move on the trail. It moved through the brush, off trail, on the steep, near vertical slope of the far hollow wall, on ground that no experienced hiker would choose to descend in daylight, let alone in dense fog at 2 a.m. The sound was the sound of something heavy moving through rhododendron without slowing down, without navigating, without the hesitant, crashing, cursing progress of a human being trying to force themselves through dense brush. It simply moved through the vegetation, and the branches broke against it in a low, continuous percussion, and the sound was growing. It was coming down the slope. It was bypassing every switchback on the far trail. It was descending in a direct, vertical line through terrain that a person could not descend, moving toward the hollow floor, and then she understood this. She understood this completely and without needing to work it out. Up the near slope and onto the trail where she was standing. She ran. She turned her headlamp off because some deep and wordless part of her understood that the light was the thing it wanted, that the light was the language it had learned, the lure it had mastered, the borrowed tongue it used to speak across dark hollows. And she ran in total darkness on a trail she had only seen in the pale circle of that same headlamp, running on memory and the feel of packed earth under her boots, running by the sound of her trekking poles hitting stone. Behind her, from somewhere down in the hollow, and then closer still, a white LED beam swept through the fog. Not the irregular bobbing beam of a running hiker. A wide sweeping arc, left to right, moving through the trees below the trail, then through the rhododendron at the trail's edge, then along the trail itself, painting the fog with sharp, cold light, hunting the source of the signal it had received. She ran. She ran with her eyes fully open and completely blind, and the beam swept behind her, and the branches of the rhododendron on both sides closed over her head, and she ran. She reached the shelter. She does not know precisely how. The recording captures 11 minutes of her breathing and her footsteps, and in the distance, diminishing but never entirely absent, the sound of heavy movement through brush. And then the recording captures the sound of a metal roof in rain, because the storm had arrived, and the rain was loud on the shelter roof, and eventually the other sounds were gone, or were buried inside the sound of the rain, which may or may not be the same thing. She sat in that shelter for 3 days. The storm lasted 2. She sat for 1 more day after it cleared, while pale October light moved slowly across the shelter floor, and the woods dripped, and the mountain was very quiet. She told the person who found her that she had no memory of being afraid after she reached the shelter. What she remembered was a feeling she could not name precisely, a slow and careful removal, as though something had reached into the place where her certainty about the world was stored and taken one specific, load-bearing thing out of it. She hiked out on the 4th day. She has not returned to the high route. In the shelter log, the pencil-written record that hikers leave in the plastic bag tucked between the boards, she wrote only 1 sentence. Do not signal across the hollow at night. She did not say what would answer. She trusted that the mountain would explain it to them when the time came, in its own way. Sleep well now. You are not on the mountain. You are warm and still and the only light in your room is the one you chose to leave on. No hollow stretches out beneath your window. No fog moves through the trees outside your door. Whatever is out there on those high, dark ridgelines tonight, it is looking for a signal. So give it nothing. Keep your light close. Keep it quiet. And sleep.